Yes, it was a JoJo reference indeed. Hello guys, Sir Grindalot here with a guide for the deck that I've been playing recently in PvP, and it has been performing extremely well for me, really well. This deck is a fusion of the Collei Double Electro and Ayamiya decks. It works similarly to both actually, with some of their strengths and some of their weaknesses. And I decided to build the deck focusing a lot on the early game while also giving the deck a little bit of sustain. What this creates is a deck that, if you're playing against a slower deck, you can really pack a punch during the first few turns, thanks to the Dendro reactions. But if you're playing against another very fast deck, you have a little bit of healing that is usually just enough to give you a little bit of edge in the early game, so that when you reach turn 3, turn 4, and things start to settle a little bit, you may have more hit points than your opponents, and your elemental reaction will eventually take over the game. The cool thing about the burning effect is that it can essentially sustain itself. And what I mean by that is, if you're using quicken reactions, eventually you need to reapply the second element. If you are on your Electro characters, eventually you need to reapply Dendro. If you are on your Dendro characters, eventually you need to reapply Electro. Burning is a little bit different because it summons a thing that stays on the field and shoots 1 burning damage in direction of the opponent. It doesn't sound like a lot, but what it does is that if your opponent already has Dendro applied to it, it will take a ton of damage. If it does not have Dendro applied to it, it will have Pyro applied to it from the burning effect. The following turn, by hitting the target with Dendro, you are going to generate the burning effect again, which will create a consistent loop. A thing that I like a lot about this burning deck is that you do not need Yoimiya, because due to the burning effect being able to sustain itself for several turns, all you need to do is to switch between Collei and Fatui Agent, and you're going to be absolutely fine. Yoimiya is just the icing on the cake, because if you manage to activate her burst and then switch to Collei, you are going to do things that your opponent will not enjoy in the least. But if your Yoimiya gets sniped, don't insta-quit, because you still have chances at winning with this deck. As long as you can use the Fatui Agent to apply Pyro to your opponents, and then switch to Collei to do, Collei things, and you will be generating a lot of damage. You will be losing some burst damage without Yoimiya, but the game will still be absolutely playable. I will now show you a couple of PV matches that I played against Ayaka. Her deck is pretty good. To show you how the game plays out during the duration of the match. In general, at the beginning you want to throw away everything because you want to get Collei's talent, but if I start the hand with a Pyro dice and I'm playing against an opponent that has a strategy that relies a lot on a single unit, I will keep the Pyro dice. The reason is the same reason why with the Geodude, the Lava Churl, it's good to have Geo dice in hand on turn 1, because if your opponent doesn't switch out to a different character, you're going to one-shot that character. It does not happen very often, but since it can happen and it can essentially win you the game on the spot, it's something that you should always keep under consideration. Very often my turn 1 would be play something, attack, switch character, attack, that kind of stuff. But when I have the chance to one-shot an enemy unit, I will do normal attack with Fatui Agent or normal attack with Fatui Agent, and then see what my opponent does. Here, if my opponent switched to another character, I would have considered switching to maybe Yoimiya or Collei to set up her talent for the following turn, many options. But in this case, Ayaka decided to suicide herself and I insta-gived her. It can happen in PvP. Don't think that this happens only against NPCs. You're going to win some matches by doing this. Second match against an NPC that I want to showcase is again against Yomiya, because our deck is pretty decent. Same mulligan strategy, look for the talent. We don't have a Paradise this time, so no Fatui Agent shenanigans. I would usually start with Fatui Agent, but just to show you something different, I started with Yomiya on this turn. The way I play usually when I put Yomiya on the field first is that I do a normal attack with her, and then I see what my opponent does. If I hit her hard, I will switch to the Fatui Agent. But if I do something small like switching to another character or using an elemental skill like Mona's, which doesn't deal much damage, I will stay on Yomiya to deal an extra 2 damage on the following action and have her burst fully charged for, future use. This match against the Cryo team is going to happen quite often to you, and in my experience is the match where your healing cards are going to be the most important. Because Cryo decks deal a decent amount of damage to you, but they're rarely going to one-shot you, apart from some Chongyun's shenanigans when he has full energy. What happens more often than not is that your characters are frozen, you're forced to waste a lot of time, and the opponent is hitting you consistently, rather than for a million damage, for 4 damage here, 5 damage there, and eventually they overrun you. With a bit of healing damage and damage reduction cards, you can actually make it alive past the phase where they have Hydro application available, and after that it becomes a little bit easier to handle them. Of course, if you have a very, very good hand with like a Paradise, free card draw, better dice generation, Collei's talent and stuff like that, you can go on the offense and really hit them hard. It would be very, very nice to be able to snipe Shinshu before he starts to do his own things, but it's not always possible. Similarly to how players who have Yomiya in their team tend to hide Yomiya pretty well until she's fairly safe to get on the field. Here I was evaluating whether I wanted to use the skill of a Fatui Agent now or switch immediately to Yomiya, but I wanted to only switch to Yomiya after my opponent had fewer action available. Because the idea was that if she can only be attacked once and she's at 6 hit points, it's very unlikely that she's going to die while her burst is active. The reason being, Ayaka's burst deals 3, there can be an extra 2 damage from a Pyro Dice. I was not expecting damage number 6. So I felt pretty safe about doing this without giving her any food, and just keeping a spare dice to switch to another character. And in my mind I wanted to switch to Collei. Yomiya only took 3 damage, so I was pretty safe here to switch to Collei at 10 HP. Ayaka could have had the chance of using the burst, deal a decent chunk of damage and have extra cryo damage the following turns, but decided not to. This is a play that real players would not do. Like an Ayaka on the field with the burst fully active, throwing a random normal attack, knowing well that the following turn Ayaka is going to be dead, is a play that no real players would do. It's just something that happens against the NPCs because every now and then they have a stroke, like their AI forgets that they're supposed to be doing things in a slightly more reasonable way. Of course, after this happened, the match was over in no time, because once you reach this stage, what you want to do is stay on Collei, use her elemental skill as much as you can with her talent, and heal her up. If your opponent cannot burst her down, stay on Collei as much as you can, charge her energy, use her burst. Very often, if her burst is on the field, that is going to be enough to win. If she has dealt enough damage during her turn. Because as you can see, the amount of damage that is dished out is fairly obnoxious, because there is her own damage, plus Yomiya's damage, plus the reaction, plus at the end of the turn there is going to be the all the Dendro Pyro stuff, all the burning stuff. And Ayaka's play here was to essentially sacrifice Shinshu to try to win the game with Chongers. 1 against 3 Chongers is not going to win. If Ayaka had the card that after using a skill you automatically switch to another character, there might have been a little bit of potential there. But with just the Chongers by himself and Shinshu dying at the end of the turn, there was no way this match was going to last. So it was an easy. First match that I want to showcase is against an interesting deck with Ganyu Double Electro. It's a deck that does not have a lot of sustain. And my opponent's strategy was, rather than focusing on single target damage like many other decks do, just focus exclusively on AoE damage, with Ganyu's Frostflake, Ganyu's Burst, and the triggering of all the piercing reaction with the Electro character. It was pretty nasty. Pretty nasty. I had a decent starting end, but not a lot of sustain at the beginning, which made my characters drop a lot of hit points. I decided to start with Yumiya here, because I know that Ganyu's single target damage is not amazing, and I was pretty safe. My second action would have depended on based on what my opponent was going to do. I kinda wanted to waste their move to see what they were going to do, because I was not going to have priority anyway. So I decided to switch to Fatui Agent for a moment, then back to Yomiya, in order to let her charge the burst for the second turn. Ideally, the second turn I would like to have free Pyro, free Dendro, to, you know, set up a burst, switch to Collei, set up elemental skill with their talent, and keep going from there. Sometimes you need to be a little bit careful about things that happen, because you don't want your on-field character to be insta-gibbed while Yumiya's burst is up. It's not very good. At 8 hit points, I was fairly confident I was not going to die, especially because my opponent does not have access to Cryo Resonance, which increases damage. So here I was pretty certain that my turn was going to be Yomiya's burst, switch to Collei, equip her talent, see what happens. I decided not to kill Ganyu right away, because I needed all the dice in order to follow my main plan. And I thought that switching to Collei and activating her talent, her elemental skill, was going to provide more long-term value rather than killing Ganyu, who, for me, already did her job. Right? It felt like my opponent's goal in this game was just one Frostflake arrow, something, burst, go Electro. And unfortunately, I still had not seen any of my healing cards, neither food nor the location, which was a little bit of a bummer, because I noticed that my hit points were going down quite quickly. Like, sure, my opponent had a character at 3 hit points that is borderline dead, but the other 2 are at full hit points, and I knew that there was going to be a lot of piercing damage going in my direction in the following turns. Opponent decided to switch to a character that was not going to take a ton of damage via elemental reaction. Here I had to decide what to do, like which character to have on the field. I decided to have Collei. Reason being that my opponent's on-field character is Electro, and at the beginning of the following turn I will have Electro applied to my character. I was not particularly worried, and I decided to draw an extra couple of cards. Still no healing, so I was starting to feel very concerned. My dice skills in this game are slightly questionable. A little bit of improvement there, but not that much. That was a very good pickup, because being able to heal while using an elemental skill that hits pretty hard is extremely valuable. It's a very, very good tempo play. If I did not pick up that card, I might have considered switching to the Fatui for an action or 2 and see where my opponent was going after that. But I was pretty sure that there was no way he could kill my Collei right at the time, so I decided to stay on her for a little bit, and here I decided to do that. This meant that in my head, Collei was dead, which was not particularly good, but both me and my opponent had a lot of damage playable from hand. I had a little bit of sustain, and more importantly, I had the Pyro card. With Ganyu being borderline dead, and Fischl being at 4 hit points with Dendro applied to her, it meant that as long as my opponent was not able to one-shot all my characters right now, which was not going to happen, I was having an easy win the next turn, because I had priority. Ganyu was dead at the end of a turn, and I could use the Pyro Resonance card to kill Fischl in all safety. It was a very tight match, and I had to, calculate a little bit what was going on, but everything turned out to be pretty okay. GG Fischl, GG. Second match that I wanted to showcase is against a very slow freeze deck. You can see how this deck works against slower opponent. You can be a little bit more offensive in your action. I was not 100% sure what kind of deck I was going to face here, so I started with the Fatui Agent to see what would happen, but in hindsight, I would have probably been better off starting with Yoimiya. Because Diona, Mona, Kei are not going to one-shot her on turn 1. Not very likely. It could happen, but not very likely. But if you stay the full first turn on Fatui Agent and you charge up his elemental skill, his elemental burst, it's actually not bad. Because his elemental burst can hit quite hard, and later in the game, even when he's a bit in the background, he has not been on the field for a while, there are times when he can catch opponents off guard. Unfortunately, free Dendro die is pretty useless right now, because you don't want to switch to Collei when she has nothing to do, just for the sake of it. I would rather stay on the Pyro characters to try to set up the burst, try to apply Pyro to a few of my opponent's units, and then see where the game goes from there. Here my opponent only had the 1 dice now left, so I felt pretty safe about staying on Yoimiya, doing a couple of normal attacks, activate her burst, and then use it the following turn. Got Collei's talent, which is nice. It's always very, very nice when you get Collei's talents. As you can see, we're not one-shotting anyone, but we can now start to go on the offensive. Because we have Yoimiya's burst up, we can go to Collei, we can use her talent. There is a lot of interesting stuff we can do now over the next few turns, because in addition to the straight up burst damage that we can do with Collei using her elemental skill, and then the interaction with Yoimiya's burst and all this sort of stuff, the opponent will also have to deal with the consistent elemental reaction, burning and then Collei's burst when it's on the field. That's no joke. It's really a lot of damage. Diona is very good at tanking. Very, very good. And with the Fatui Agent on the ground, a thing that we can do is, if we simply use his elemental skill, we're going to apply Pyro, which could go either on Colleya or on Diona, or we could get frozen, like it happened in this turn, and we switch back to Collei. Sometimes your plan needs to adapt based on what your opponent does, because there can be situations where the opponent does not have a free cryo dice, and they don't feel like wasting some of their cards just to free one of your dudes, and so they do something else. Here what I was hoping that would happen was that the opponent would switch to mana, because Collei would hit mana like a truck here, generating an elemental reaction. Unfortunately, it didn't happen. I didn't manage to bait my opponent, so I decided to change plan, take the L, and use Collei's burst to say hello to Colleya. And as you can see, it keeps recharging. The burning field on the ground keeps recharging. Once you reach this stage, you no longer need to worry about elemental applications, because something is going to happen each turn which allows you to keep going. Either you go to Collei and you apply Dendro, or some of your characters already have Dendro. You're going to apply Pyro very consistently. From this stage of the game, you're going to have a very, very easy time, as long as you can have a little bit of sustain. Here, after also taking down Diona, the match was completely over, so we can move on and we can see the last match that I recorded for you. The last match that I will play for you is one that you may have already seen on my YouTube channel. Remember to subscribe. You may be thinking, holy crap, Sir Grant, you're recycling your own matches. But at least it's against a good deck. And it was a good match overall. With a little bit of decision making on both sides that decided the result of the game, rather than someone having the better draw over the other, or going first with bad dice, all this sort of stuff. It was not a great game for me in terms of RNG, but it turned out to be okay. It turned out to be okay with a little bit of sustain, good consistent elemental reactions. I think my opponent made one mistake, but it was not necessarily a mistake. As you can see, we're playing in a very similar way here, because the two decks can play in a very similar way at the very beginning. But I would rather split damage between my characters. Okay. So essentially I traded a little bit of damage on Yoimiya for her ability of having the burst up, while my opponent preferred to stay on the Fatui Dude the whole turn. And then I switched back to the Fatui Dude. And sometimes your game plan needs to change also according to what you draw. Because, for example, when you have cards in hand like Leave It All To Me, the Noelle card, and the Pyro Dice, and an Adeptus Temptation, nasty things can happen to your opponent when all the cards that you have in hand can impact the fight. Here my opponent decided to use the burst on my Fatui Agent just to hit him pretty hard. Not a bad choice. Personally, I would have saved it and I would have switched to Yoimiya, but it was not necessarily a bad move, in my humble, honestly opinion, to be quite frankly with you. And since I'm not taking a ton of damage on Yoimiya and Collei, I decided to keep on hand the healing location, because it costs 2 of the same color. It's not always easy to use. And I only want to use it when I know that I can do it without that cost coming at a huge tempo disadvantage. Here my opponent knows that Collei is going to do things starting from the next turn, even though I do not have her talent card. We would have to see the next turn what was going to happen. And here I clearly outskilled my opponent for the first time in the match, finally managed to drawing the right card at the right time, and also having some of the correct dice, because that's always a thing that can happen. I'm guessing that my opponent was a little bit concerned about switching to Ayaka too early, because he was afraid of taking too much pressure from my Yoimiya's burst Ayaka. Yoimiya's burst Collei. Because no matter what my opponent was doing, if Yoimiya showed up on the field, I would have hit her like a truck with Collei. So I guess my opponent was not a huge fan of that. And here they decided to do a thing that I can understand, but it cost them the game. which was, well, my opponent has 1 attack left, my Yomiya is at 9, GG, well played. The problem is that I did not have 1 attack left, but I had 2, because I kept the Pyro dice in hand. This allowed me to cast Collei's Burst first, for quite a bit of damage and setting up the reaction field on the ground, and then also do the rest. Now the match is completely over, of course, and GG, well played. You tried but you failed. The lesson is never try. We now need to talk about the big elephant in the room. It's an elephant in the shape of leeks and nerfs. Because in the 3.4 patch there are going to be some adjustments in the trading card game, and 2 of those nerfs are going to impact this deck. Yomiya's Burst is going to cost 4 instead of 3, and Collei's Talent is going to cost 4 instead of 3. Very annoying. I believe the matches in which on turn 2 I went Yomiya's Burst into Collei's Talent, it happened maybe once or twice in more than 30 matches with this deck. So it's not like that line of gameplay is going to be impacted very much, and if that happens you are doomed, you are never good. No, this is not a combo deck that if you don't win on turn 2 you are doomed. This is a deck that set up elemental reaction during the first few turns, has a little bit of healing, and then starts to generate burst damage with Collei. It's definitely going to impact the deck. It means that what more often than not will happen is you activate your burst on Yomiya, then you switch to another character, and then the following turn you go to Collei and you use her talent and you start to do things. It's going to be a little bit of a bummer, but it shouldn't be too bad. A thing that I may consider, if I have the feeling that Yomiya's cost nerf may be too significant, is I may consider using Xianling instead of Yomiya. Simply because Xianling with her elemental skill is going to summon a dude who is going to throw Pyro out. And in this deck you really care about applying Pyro, more so than setting up an expensive burst that will give you even more damage later on. I see this deck, I have not tested it, but I see this deck working absolutely fine with Xianling Collei Pyro Agent, adjusting maybe a few things here and there, but it should not be a big deal. But we will have to see what happens in the next patch, because my main fear is that if only those things get touched, in the 3.4 we will be facing a lot of Mango Kinky and Freeze. But we shall see. That's all for today, guys. Try this deck because it's very good. Enjoy it before it gets nerfed into oblivion, and after it gets nerfed, if you enjoy playing it, keep playing it, because I'm pretty sure it will still be good. Bye guys, take care.